Lincoln never fought back after the Bible slipped from his hands. And no, he was just swinging slowly. Then the man looked right at me in the dream, and he said, "Nation, specifically nation, brace yourself for fire and ice, and don't forget to anchor your soul."
Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Zack Mason. I'm an author and attempt to be a teacher of the Bible. I also from time to time do some interpretations on dreams that I think are from God. And today this video is what I would call an amplified interpretation, an attempt to make it simple and clear for you to understand of a specific dream that's called the Lincoln Dream that a pastor in Kentucky by the name of Dana Coverstone had. If you're not familiar with Dana Coverstone, I did another video. I think it's be posted right before this one, where I explain why I do believe that Coverstone's dreams are from God. And I go through the evidence in that video. So if you're a skeptic who doesn't believe, go watch that video. I'm not going to repeat my reasons every time I do one of these, but you can go look at that. Have your questions answered. Regardless, let's we're gonna look at the Lincoln Dream, and we're gonna start watching a little bit here, and then I'm gonna give commentary as we go. So let's start watching the dream.
Hey everybody, it is Tuesday, November the 17th. I'm going to share a dream that I had on November 9th, 2020, last week. And I spent about a week just praying over this one, walking through this one, shared it with both John and Cherie, and they're working on some things with it. But it was one of those ones that just makes you think. I've had some folks ask me if I was still going to be putting dreams out. I don't go to bed saying, okay, God, give me a dream. I just simply am sharing what I saw. And I do want to remind people that dreams are most of the time not literal. I've got 500 people saying nothing in those dreams has come true, and I've got 500 people saying everything in those dreams is coming true, and I've got half a dozen saying, oh, some's coming true, some's not. Dreams, for the most part, are not literal. They're symbolic. I do believe we're seeing some of the things happen for sure, but we'll just go from there. So here it is. It's a dream I had on November 9th, 2020. I saw Abraham Lincoln at the Lincoln Memorial, and he was standing up at his seat with his right hand held up and was being addressed by Uncle Sam. There were spotlights aimed at his head, and he was bathed in like this overwhelming light. And on the granite seat where he'd been sitting was a stack of law books, and on the bottom was a simple brown leather rawhide Bible that was larger and thicker than any of the other law books on top. His top hat, the hat that Lincoln was known for using, was sitting on top of the law books, and it kind of made the stack look like a pyramid.
All right, so we see we're in the Lincoln Memorial, and we see Abraham Lincoln is not a statue. He's standing up, okay, and he's got his right hand held up, and he's being addressed by Uncle Sam. Now, there is a lot of details in this dream, and by the time we get done, you know, if you've seen it before, it's pretty clear the basics of what's happening. And you get enough clarity that you feel, even though you didn't understand everything, you're okay with, you understood basically what happened. But when you really get the key to it, it all becomes clear and is unlocked. Now, there's the key to this dream. Why why Abraham Lincoln? Why is this dream about Abraham Lincoln? That is the key. When you understand that, everything else makes sense. Okay, and the answer to that question is given later in the dream. But in the interest of helping you understand more easily as we go to see, let's go ahead and talk about it now. Abraham Lincoln presided. He's not only recognized as one of the best presidents the United States has had, and he's not only universally beloved for the most part, but he is known for presiding over the United States during one of our hardest times, the Civil War. So he's connected to the Civil War. But personally, Abraham Lincoln, his motivation, his primary driving motivation, personally speaking, for engaging in the Civil War, for refusing to let the South leave, for insisting on fighting rather than dividing, is he was personally passionate about the union of the states, of keeping the United States together in union. So that, I believe, identifies him, is that concept of the union is identified with him more than any other president. So we're going to understand that that is why God has chosen the symbol of Abraham Lincoln for this dream, because Lincoln represents the union of the United States. He's being addressed by Uncle Sam. Now, Uncle Sam, interestingly, I believe, was modeled after Abraham Lincoln. Like his appearance, he's given white hair, but he was modeled after the tall, lanky Abraham Lincoln with the same top hat, but his hair was made white, and he, had the patriotic stripes on his entire outfit. But who does Uncle Sam represent? Uncle Sam, Uncle Sam wants you. Posters from World War II. Who wanted you? Uncle Sam, the United States government. Okay? Uncle Sam does not represent you and me. Uncle Sam represents the United States government. Lincoln represents the Union of the United States, and in a sense, us, the American people, in unity. Okay? So now that we understand those two symbols, let's begin analyzing. So Lincoln is standing, no longer seated. Okay? You sit when you're resting. So the Union has been held together for so many years in a state of rest. It hasn't been a strain for us to stay united. But now he's standing. You stand when you're about to work, when you're having to do something, when you're not able to rest anymore. You have to get up for something. So the Union is no longer assured. It's no longer able to rest in its unity. Right hand held up, right hand's the good hand. It's the hand you hold up when you're about to testify or bear witness. He's being addressed by Uncle Sam, who we're going to see is essentially acting like a prosecutor. Spotlights were aimed at Lincoln's head. He was bathed in an overwhelming light. Why do you have, the idea that he's standing with his right hand up and being addressed by the prosecutor of Uncle Sam. Why spotlights? Who's heard of spotlights in a trial, in a courtroom? Well, it's a show trial. Okay, this is a show trial. Now, back on the seat behind him, where Lincoln was seated, there was a stack of law books. And underneath the law books was a simple brown leather rawhide Bible. And the Bible was larger and thicker than any other law books on top. Okay, why? Why does this mean? The law books in the Bible are back on his seat where he was resting. So the Union of the United States is dependent on its laws. The laws of the United States hold it together. And the foundation of those laws is the Bible. And it's larger and thicker than all the law books that are sitting on top of it because it is the foundation. It is the most important law book. And without it, all our other laws are meaningless. They have no foundation. It says his top hat was, one more point. The law books are not in his hands. They're in the back seat where he was. So the law is being ignored, as is the Bible. His top hat was sitting on top of the stack. And it was smaller, so it made the stack look like a pyramid. Okay, so his top hat was kind of dwarfed down or shrunk down and was sitting on the law books. So it looked small compared to them and even smaller compared to the Bible, and it looked like a pyramid. First of all, why has he taken the hat off? We're going to see that they were refusing to acknowledge his role as president. I thought about the hat. The hat is not really a symbol you see a lot in the Bible, so this is one where you have to kind of ask yourself, what are the characteristics of a hat? What would it symbolize? Well, for the most part, I mean, sometimes a hat will reveal your nationality. Like a Mexican sombrero is associated with Mexico. But for the most part, hats are associated with your profession, okay? So we think about the old style nurses' hats, police hats. Soldiers, have their soldier helmets. You have firemen's helmets. There's all kinds of hats. Construction workers' helmets. All of these things. You see a certain hat and you think of a profession. So, and Lincoln's top hat is specifically associated with him as president. It represents his profession. And in fact, so you have Lincoln the person, and then the top hat represents the formality, his formal state as President of the United States. It's a formal attire. It's his uniform. So taking the hat off means that he is standing with his right hand as the person of Lincoln, as the man of Lincoln, not in his profession or his role as president. And in fact, we're going to see they refused to recognize he was president. So, note also the top hat added stature. Lincoln was very tall as well. But as president, the hat, the job is never the main part of a person's stature, but it does add a little bit of stature to them. In this case, he's removed it and it's sitting on top of the law books, but it's smaller. Why? Because the role of president or a single president in their office, the office of president, the office of vice president, the office of any cabinet official, the office of a senator, none of those offices are significant in size compared to the laws that are their foundation, and which is not significant compared to the Bible, which is the foundation of the laws. So that's why it's a pyramid. It's not a New Age symbol. It's not this Masonic lodge with the all-seeing eye on top of the pyramid. Don't get lost in that. This dream is from God, and the foundation of this pyramid is the Bible. Okay? So, all right, well, let's watch a little bit more of the dream here.
Uncle Sam asked him if he would tell the truth, the whole truth, so help him God. And Lincoln said, "That is all you will get from me on this day." Uncle Sam walked backwards without turning around, and he stepped up onto a platform and removed his patriotic hat, and he whispered the words, "I am sorry," towards Lincoln.
Okay, so the Union is on trial. Uncle Sam asked him if he would tell the truth, the whole truth, so help him God. Again, that's trial language. Lincoln responded, says, "That is all you will get from me this day." And he's known as Honest Abe. This doesn't surprise us. His response is, though, a little bit defiant. Okay, so Uncle Sam is going through the motions of a trial. Lincoln is responding with his hand up. "That is all you will get from me this day." It sounds like an answer Abraham Lincoln would give, frankly. But then Uncle Sam, the U.S. government, walked backwards and stepped up onto a platform. Okay, why is he walking backwards? Why does he step onto a platform? He walks backwards for two reasons. So the United States government is not prepared at this point in the dream to turn its back on the Union, to turn around. But it is backing away from the Union. So it's carefully backing away. There's a respect there still. Not turning the back, but distancing. Stepping onto a platform. Again, this is a show trial. Okay, they're putting on a show. He removes his patriotic hat. So Uncle Sam now is also removing his top hat, which has stripes. So this is a very personal trial. The persons of the U.S. government, not Now they will, when this happens, they will be acting in official capacity, like they will be doing things officially to cause everything we're about to see to happen. But it's really not the laws driving it of the U.S. government. It's people. It's people in the government driving it. That's what that means about removing the hat. And he mouthed the words softly to Lincoln, "I'm sorry." Okay, now the United States government is more than our president, more than our elected officials. There are patriotic people in the State Department. There are patriotic people in the IRS. There are patriotic people in the Department of the Interior. There are patriotic people in, of course, in the U.S. military. There are patriotic Americans in every branch. There's obviously corrupt ones. We know the deep state is real. There's obviously corrupt ones. But there's a lot of good Americans there too that joined the U.S. government because they loved our country and they wanted to do good. They wanted to help our country. There are people like that. A lot of them. And they're the ones mouthing to Lincoln, the Union, "I'm sorry."
Then he shifted his eyes to his right and left, and then to the right again, as if he were getting acknowledgement from people behind him. A voice shouted very loudly, "Get it over with already." And then a hand appeared and pulled a curtain along a piece of rope that appeared to be about 50 feet long. So they're just pulling a rope like this. And this made it appear as if the judge were standing in front of a large black backdrop, and on each side, hanging like almost like a banner waving down, was a tattered American flag on a pole. Lincoln remained standing as if he had never considered even sitting on the seat. There were marks on his face like he'd been assaulted. He had a sling over his left arm and a bandage around his left hand with blood showing through the palm. And he kept a very stern face, but was obviously in slight pain from whatever had happened.
Okay, so Uncle Sam, remember Uncle Sam represents the U.S. government. He shifted his eyes from the right to the left to the right again, as if getting acknowledgement from the people around him. Now, before I talk about that, I do want to go on a brief tangent here. And I don't know if Mr. Coverstone ever sees any of my videos. I doubt it. But if he did, I would want to say that these kind of details, when you report them, are important. And I do take task with Mr. Coverstone on the release of his latest dream, the Desert Dream. The reason is because he obviously felt very emotional about what he'd seen in the dream, especially by the ending message. And as he stated himself, he felt like he needed to preach that dream rather than just present it and then preach. And I would ask him to please never do that again. Yes, preach, but report the dream first with its exact details, because in the presentation of the dream, he confused, looking to the right and then later it was to the left, and he confused the order, and some of the details got obscured, and he was mixing them with interpretations from notes that Sherry Goff had sent him, and he was interpreting as he went. And it makes it very difficult to know that we understand exactly what was seen in the dream. And that's what, if these dreams were given to you, Mr. Coverstone, for our benefit, for the benefit of more than just you, then we need to hear the dream first. Then interpret if you want to interpret, or then preach, by all means. I mean, your message was excellent. I mean, your message about the fire that we need to feel for God and His kingdom was great. My only issue is when you did it, is not letting us hear the details first and then preaching that, okay? Because it obscures things that we need to be able to understand and to make sure we're getting the interpretation right. Anyways, tangent over. Sorry. I am a fan of Coverstone, but that one, I wasn't happy with that presentation. I'm sorry. That said, let's get back to this. In this one, Coverstone was very careful to give us exactly the details. And he said he shifted his eyes from the right to the left, then right again, as if getting acknowledgement from the people around him. Okay, So Uncle Sam, the U.S. government, is being driven by people, not himself, but by people demanding something. He looked to the right twice and to the left once. Right, then left, then right again. So clearly what this is about is the U.S. government is considering changing something, or putting the Union of the United States on trial, so to speak. And we're going to see it's actually, the Union is going to be destroyed. But looking to the right twice tells me that both sides want this dissolution of the Union. They want the Union of the United States to end. The right and the left. Conservatives and liberals want this at this point. Whenever this begins, the American people, politicians from the right and left, want the Union ended. But it must be conservatives are even more passionate about it and vocal about it than liberals. Because he looks to the right twice. That's what I get out of that. And a voice from those people, which aren't visible yet, shouted very loudly, "Get it over with already." So the people are furious. The people are driving this. People in the government, people, politicians, the American people, I'm sure as well. They want this to happen. A hand appeared and began pulling back a curtain. This sounds like, now he wasn't clear if it was a human hand that just, we couldn't see the person, or if it's a disembodied hand. I tend to, from the context, I believe it's probably a disembodied hand, which means this is God himself pulling back the curtain so we can see what's behind it. And what's revealed is a black background, which would be a sinful background, and two American flag banners on either side behind Uncle Sam. Both were tattered. Okay, the American flag banners right and left are tattered. Now, if you've seen my videos, the teaching I've done on Revelation, on the red horseman in Revelation chapter 6, 3, and 4, I've got a video on that. I talk about the coming war. I've put compilations of lots of dreams on what I call phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4 of the red horseman in the United States. And phase 1 appears to be chaos and hatred, where Americans are just attacking each other, hating each other, not just on social media, but actually killing each other in the streets. Phase 2 is an actual pitched battle, civil war between two armies. Phase 3 is an EMP. Phase 4 is the invasion by Russia and China. This dream is about the dissolution of the United States of America, the dissolution of the Union of the States. But these flags are both tattered. So what this tells me is this dream is speaking to us about the beginning of phase 2. Phase 1 has already been happening. Americans have already been attacking each other. Our flags are in tatters. We're wounded from self-hatred. But the division of a second civil war has not begun yet. And notice again, Lincoln's a symbol because he was connected to the first Civil War. Lincoln remained standing as if he never considered sitting on the seat. He understands he can't sit. There's no rest for the Union to be had right now. Then Coverstone noticed new details. He said Lincoln looked battered, like he'd been assaulted. Okay, so he'd been beaten. The Union had already been beaten up by itself. By the people had been beating each other up. Marks on his face. The face is a symbol for the leadership. So politicians, leaders have been attacked. His left arm was the arm is a symbol for our power. You know, we do things with our arm. Now, there have been a lot of dreams that Christians have been having about a future time when there's going to be a lot of arrests, massive arrests of liberals and liberal politicians, Democrat politicians, and some Republican politicians for corruption, for a lot of corruption. There's a lot of supposition as to what that might be. I have my ideas, but this seems to be indicating that that would happen, and that would explain the chaos. It would explain why Americans are hating each other and attacking each other so viciously that their neighbors are killing each other. If there were these massive arrests of corrupt politicians on one side of the aisle especially, then you can see how Americans might start attacking each other. And but this left arm in a sling would seem to indicate that that actually will happen, and that the left is very wounded and very has lost a lot of its ability to fight, or its ability of its power. That could be, again, driving why the right side, the conservatives, are doubly desiring of this dissolution of the Union with leftist states because they're so disgusted by corruption, etc. There was also a bandage around his left hand with blood showing through the palm. So there's a clear wounding of the left side that has happened already. Lincoln kept, but notice that, let's pause there. Whatever your political persuasion, we're supposed to be brothers and sisters in Christ. We're supposed to be unified as Americans. Unified as Christians, of course. And we are approaching our brothers and sisters in this country as enemies instead of people that we just need to love. We can still believe and say things strongly, and we can rebuke. But when it becomes hatred and we view them as less or different or not someone we have community with, it causes what we're seeing here. Both sides are part of Lincoln. He has a right side and a left side, but it's all we're all in this country together. He kept a very stern face, but he was in slight pain from whatever had happened.
Uncle Sam cleared his throat 3 times, and then he said, "Hear ye, hear ye. The accused before you is here to admit his crimes publicly and will do so voluntarily. How do you plead, Mr. Lincoln?" Not President, but Mr. Lincoln. President never blinked his eyes. He swallowed hard and he said, "I won't." Uncle Sam winked at the president, asked again while grimacing in a way to get Lincoln's attention. "I won't" was repeated, and Uncle Sam looked back above and beyond the curtain behind him, and then looked back wearily. "Mr. Lincoln, you must make a plea." But Lincoln responded by saying, "Well, then give me a trial by jury after I do." Lincoln simply looked straight ahead and said nothing. 2 men then walked up behind Uncle Sam. Each went to a side, and they whispered in both of his ears. And Uncle Sam grimaced, and he dropped his head as the 2 men went back behind the curtain. Uncle Sam then stood before Lincoln and the crowd of people who had appeared near the chair at the memorial. And this crowd was aggressive, mean-spirited. They held signs, and specifically they had torches in their hands.
So Uncle Sam clears his throat 3 times and says, "Hear ye, hear ye. The accused is here to admit his crimes publicly and will do so voluntarily." Okay, so Uncle Sam is struggling for voice. The U.S. government is struggling to find his voice. He's clearing his throat 3 times. And then says, "Hear ye, hear ye, hear. The accused is here to admit his crimes publicly and will do so voluntarily." And we see that Lincoln isn't on board with this plan. So this wasn't like a prearranged agreement or anything. That's not something you do in a trial unless you have even then, when have you heard such a phrase in an American court? Clearly the law books have been left on the seat. "How do you plead, Mr. Lincoln?" And Coverstone made note that he refused to say the word president. He said, "Mr. Lincoln." Again, Lincoln's hat has been put back on the seat as well. Professionally, he was the president. Personally, he loved the Union. Okay, that's why as a person, he represents the Union. They are, by doing this, by refusing to call him president, by insisting on referring to him as Mr. Lincoln, they are disrespecting the importance of the Union. They're relegating the concept of the Union of the United States to be something less significant and important than it is. Mr. Lincoln never blinked his eyes, but he swallowed hard because he swallowed hard because he knew this is a momentous moment. And he said, I won't. Why did he say I won't? The reason he said I won't is because the Union isn't capable of being judged by the U.S. government, is it? The U.S. government exists because of the Union. So how can the government demand the Union plead guilty to something? It can't. Uncle Sam winked, grimaced to get him to change. He winked at Lincoln. He's trying to get, come on, just go along with it. Just go along. Maybe I get you a lighter sentence. I don't know what his motivation was, but he's trying to get him to go along with it. Lincoln repeated, I won't. I won't plea. Uncle Sam looked back and behind himself above the curtain. So he's checking with his bosses for what he's supposed to do. Then he looked back wearily. So he realizes he's being told the people that are pushing this are determined to do something. And Uncle Sam doesn't want it. Mr. Lincoln, you must make a plea, he says. Lincoln said, well, then give me a trial by jury after I do. Why that response? Because the Union is not recognizing the authority of the officials behind the curtain who are directing this destruction of the Union. Instead, he's saying, why don't we take this to the people to decide? Then Lincoln looked straight ahead and said nothing. Two men then walked up to Uncle Sam, and they each whispered something in both his ears. So two men walk up, and they whisper in each of his ears at the same time, his right and his left. Why two men? Because it's both the right and the left of our officials are going to be telling the U.S. government, we're in agreement with this path. Both sides of the political aisle. Uncle Sam grimaced and dropped his head as both men went back behind the curtain because they have just decreed their will. All the people behind the curtain have expressed their will to the lower level officials in the U.S. government, saying this is what we're doing. Then a crowd of people appeared in the memorial, mean-spirited, aggressive, signs in their hands, and torches. This is a mob. This is like a mob out to get Frankenstein, right? So this indicates that it is more than just officials, that there is at least a large element or a certain element of the American people that are demanding this as well. And mobs are not rational. These guys are mean-spirited. They're aggressive. Clearly, these aren't Christians walking in the fruit of the Spirit. They're out to get and make sure the Union is punished.
Lincoln stood taller and closed his eyes slowly after looking both to his right and his left, and at each of the men who stood behind Uncle Sam. And these people consisted of federal elected and appointed officials, governors, and judges in their robes. Uncle Sam walked up to Lincoln and whispered in his ear and revealed tears running down his cheek. He choked back a sob, and he said, Mr. Lincoln, you have been found guilty by those in power and are sentenced to death by hanging for it. Mr. Lincoln said, as the former president of this union, I deserve to know what I am accused of to begin with. I am an attorney, and I know what the law says. Uncle Sam stated clearly and precisely and with great struggle. We do not recognize the law of man or of God and simply find you worthy of death. Your time is over, and a new dawn awaits those who will dwell on this earth.
So now Lincoln looks to his right and his left. So he's also looking at both sides. We see federally elected and appointed officials, governors and judges stood behind Uncle Sam. When Coverstone says federally elected officials, he means senators and representatives and even the president or vice president. When he says federally appointed officials, he means cabinet officials or other positions that are appointed by the president and then approved by Congress. But all top dogs, governors and judges. So state level as well, not just federal. And judges, the judiciary, the courts are in agreement with this as well. Everybody's in agreement. All of the important officials in the judicial branch, in the legislative branch, and the executive branch, and at the state level are all in agreement. Both sides of the aisle, this needs to happen. And they're the ones driving the government to dissolve the Union. Uncle Sam walked up to Lincoln and whispered in his ear with tears running down his cheek. He doesn't want to do it. Uncle Sam choked back a sob and said, "Mr. Lincoln, you have been found guilty by those in power and are sentenced to death by hanging for it." Lincoln said, "As the former president of this union," and that's the evidence of what he stands for, "I deserve to know what I am accused of to begin with. I am an attorney and I know what the law says." So Uncle Sam, representing the U.S. government, has not really stated a charge, which Lincoln is challenging. He said, "You've been found guilty." There's not even been a trial. Lincoln hadn't even got to the point where he'd entered a plea and they found him guilty. They're ignoring all the laws. What then is their ability to do this? Power. That's it. They have the power to do it. There's no good reason to do it, legally speaking, but they have the power. It's what they want, so they're going to do it. That's what they've said. "You've been found guilty by those in power." Lincoln's response says, "Hey, I used to lead this union. I represent the union. I know the law. You're not following it. What is my charge?" Uncle Sam stated clearly and precisely with great struggle because there's no foundation, legitimate legal foundation for what he's about to say. And he knows it. But Lincoln has made him clarify exactly how far off base they are. He says, "We do not recognize the law of man or the law of God and simply find you worthy of death. We don't recognize the Bible and we don't recognize the Constitution. Your time is over. The United States is over. And a new dawn awaits those who dwell on this earth." We're going into a new season, one that does not include the old-fashioned United States of America. We're going to do something new.
And at this time, the men standing behind Uncle Sam came forward and they put a noose around Lincoln's neck and they tightened it. Then they pushed Uncle Sam forward while they threw the end of the rope over a marble brace at the memorial. And they handed the end of the rope to Uncle Sam and saluted him. Uncle Sam held that rope in his hands for a very long time and he wept. And then he faced Lincoln and he said, "I'm sorry, Mr. President." And at this statement, the men behind him pounded him about the head and neck until bruising began to appear on Uncle Sam's head. And they yelled at him and said this, "You address him as Mr. Lincoln, nothing more." So Uncle Sam looked back at the men and said, "You can hang me next for what I've allowed you to do to my conscience." He then started pulling on the rope. President Lincoln stood quietly and began to feel the tautness of the rope but he reached backwards and began fighting to grab something on his seat. As Uncle Sam strained to pull and hold the rope, Lincoln was trying to grab his Bible and was pushing the law books off of it, but his fingers were slipping off of the binding. He did get a hold of it, but the jerking of the rope made him drop it to the floor just as his feet left the floor. Lincoln's eyes, they showed compassion towards the elected and the appointed men in front of him. As Uncle Sam, holding the rope tight, would not look at anything but the floor. What's interesting to note in the dream, Lincoln never fought back after the Bible slipped from his hands. And no, he was just swinging slowly.
All right, so the men standing behind Uncle Sam, which seems to be the officials, came forward and put a noose around Lincoln's neck and they tightened it. Now, they did not pull on the rope themselves. Instead, they pushed Uncle Sam forward so he would pull on the rope. They threw it over the marble brace of the memorial. This is more disrespect for our admiration for what Lincoln did. They handed the end of the rope to Uncle Sam and saluted him. So they're respecting the power of the government, but not the beauty of the Union, not the integrity of the Union. Uncle Sam held the rope in his hands for a very long time, and he wept. But again, I go back to, why would Uncle Sam be weeping if he's the government and all of these elected officials and appointed officials are wanting this? It's because the government's more than just them. Okay, the government is more than just them. There's a lot of good Americans in the government that are going to be grieved by this process, by what's happening. So Uncle Sam said, "I am sorry, Mr. President." Again, the government, the deep state can go another way. It's not just for corruption. There's bureaucrats, there's people involved that can slow things down. They can slow legal procedures down. They can slow that down. They can resist things. They can passively resist things, if not actively. And that's kind of what this represents, that these officials are going to be driving this and pushing for it, pushing the U.S. government to formally divide the Union and do everything it has to do. All the separations of powers, all money's for them, money's for us, what law, setting up new governments, whatever they got to do. There's a lot of official and legal things that have to happen. And the men and women, the lower level men and women of the U.S. government have to do these things, and they'll be resisting, and that's symbolized by Uncle Sam resisting. And in one moment, the recognition of the authority, of the formality, of the beauty, of the importance of the Union is remembered when it says, "I am sorry, Mr. President." But at this statement, the men began pounding Uncle Sam about the head until a bruising appeared. They yelled at him and said, "You address him as Mr. Lincoln, nothing more." So the officials, those in leadership from both sides, are demanding disrespect or disregard for the importance of the Union. Uncle Sam looked back and said to them, "You can hang me next for what I've allowed you to do to my conscience." So Uncle Sam begins pulling on the rope. Lincoln suddenly began reaching back for something on the seat, and he was trying to grab his Bible, is what Coverstone said. So at that moment, now Lincoln is the Union, so we as individual Americans are connected to him, not necessarily Uncle Sam, unless you work for the government. But this is an indication in this moment, there's going to be a brief attempt to go back to the Bible, for people to say, "Let's get back to the Bible. Don't do, we need to get back to the Bible." And that's what Lincoln is trying to do. He's grasping for it. He pushed all the laws off to get to the Bible. Roe v. Wade, God not being allowed in the schools, no prayer in schools, all of these things that have built up are being pushed off. All of man's law is pushed off, and a recognition of this is the foundation. If we're going to survive, we have to get to it. But his fingers were slipping off the binding. He couldn't get a hold of it in time. When he finally got a hold of it, right as the rope jerk taut, it made him drop it to the floor. So it'll be a brief attempt for the country to get back to the Bible, and it won't last. It won't help. It won't stop it. Won't be in time. Too little, too late. Lincoln looked with compassion on the men. Uncle Sam looked at the floor, ashamed. Lincoln never fought back after the Bible slipped from his hands. So the Union is being finished.
One of the judges, not the federal officials, one of the judges spoke up and said, "You can drop him now." And Uncle Sam very slowly and respectfully dropped Lincoln to the floor. He looked back at the men and he said, "I hope you get what you deserve for this." Then he held his chest and he dropped to the floor. He was dead within seconds with his eyes wide open, and the crowd began to scatter, including the elected and appointed men who had been behind him, encouraging this whole endeavor. At that very moment, the man appeared that I had seen in the dreams for so often. He knelt down beside President Lincoln and said, "They didn't have any idea what they were doing. And now the nation needs to brace itself for what they deserve. He then walked over to Uncle Sam, closed his eyes tenderly, and tapped the heart area 3 times, and he said, "Rest in peace, Uncle Sam. Sorry you had to see the ship go down." Then the man looked right at me in the dream, and he said, "Nation," specifically nation, "brace yourself for fire and ice, and don't forget to anchor your soul."
So, one of the judges said, you can drop him now. So this seems like an official, final determination of the Supreme Court as a judge saying this specifically. So there's probably legal battles. There's probably going to be people challenging this in court saying, no, you can't dissolve the Union. No, you can't dissolve the United States. And the final act of the United States government, official act or declaration of the U.S. Supreme Court is apparently going to be, no, this is all legal and good, and it's done. The United States is finished. Put him down. He's dead. And Uncle Sam slowly and respectfully dropped him to the floor. This is the process of actually dividing everything up among the states that are forming separate countries. Separate groups. And then Uncle Sam looked back at the men, the officials, and said, I hope you get what you deserve for this. Then Uncle Sam held his chest and he dropped to the floor. He was dead within seconds with his eyes wide open. Why? Because the U.S. government can't exist without the Union. As we said, the government's dependent on the existence of the Union to exist. And when the Union's no more, the U.S. government's no more. All the men, both sides of the aisle, elected officials, judges, etc., they began to scatter. Okay, so the Union's done, the U.S. government's done, everybody's scattering and going to protect their own and see what they can make happen. Then the Christ figure appeared, and he knelt down behind the president, President Lincoln, and said, they didn't have any idea what they were doing. And now the nation needs to brace itself for what they deserve. Many things loaded in that, but we didn't know what we were doing in demanding an end to our unity with the opposite party. Conservatives want to separate from liberals. Liberals hate and want to separate from conservatives. We all think we're self-right, we're righteous to do that. Really, the unifying thing that would heal this country would be nationwide repentance, not division. And that's why I said they have no idea what they're doing. They didn't know that the safety and security of American citizens, of the American people, depended on the Union. And now the nation needs to brace itself for what they deserve. And why do we deserve it? Do we deserve it just for the ending of the Union? No. God has allowed this division to happen at this point because of our sins, and abortion is among the biggest. Homosexual marriage is also a big one. But abortion is I think, the big driver. But I'll let God decide that. I don't claim to speak for God. Then he walked over to Uncle Sam. So he's left President Lincoln. That was his message for Lincoln. And that message for Lincoln was addressed to the nation, right? Because that was the Union. Then he walked over to Uncle Sam, closed his eyes tenderly, and tapped his heart area 3 times and said, rest in peace, Uncle Sam. Sorry you had to see the ship go down. This tells me that there are people in the U.S. government, a lot of times we criticize the government as if it's not made up of people that God loves. But he does. And he knows that those who are good, those good-hearted people in the government, their hearts were broken over what they had to be a part of. Then the man looked right at Dana Coverstone in the dream, the Christ figure, and said, nation, brace yourself for fire and ice, and don't forget to anchor your soul. The last part, don't forget to anchor your soul, is connected to, is leading us to the next dream he had that he reported right after this, called the Franklin dream, where it uses language about a captain of a boat. But what are we supposed to anchor our soul to? Well, to Him, to Jesus. We're supposed to anchor our soul to Jesus Christ, not to America. You know, for those of you who had your soul anchored to your identity as an American citizen, you're going to need to find a new anchor point, and that is as a follower of Jesus Christ, because America is going to be ended. No more. What are you going to do with your identity when you can't call yourself an American anymore, because there is no America? You gotta solidify your identity as Christian, as Christ, not American. Nation, brace yourself for fire and ice. Fire is persecution. Ice is the frozen power of God. So persecution is coming, fire, and ice is God's power that is not flowing. It's there, it's potential, but it's frozen, meaning His power won't be as available to the country as it has been in the past, especially with regards to protection. Okay, I know this was a longer video, but you know, I think there's a lot here. I hope you got something out of it. Go back and watch the dream again if you need to, but again, the two key symbol, once you understand that Lincoln symbolizes the Union and Uncle Sam represents the government, it all becomes pretty clear, and you just got to pay attention to the details. So that's it. I hope you got something out of this, and we'll see you soon.